All right, so how are we feeling about the content so far? Last night we saw a little bit more of React. We got into use effect a little bit about, hey, when this page first loads, we started to see our first component and props and how we can make that a little bit more reusable. How are we feeling in general? Do we have any questions, anything to review? Where are we at?
If it's just getting used to, me personally, I think I need to just look over the documentation for use state and use effect, but conceptually, I think I'm all right. Props are fine. It's just passing a variable through.
Yep, props are just passing a variable around. You can think of it as kind of a template of what information the prop needs in order for it to render itself properly. And you know what? It is worth mentioning. I know I mentioned at the beginning of React that the React documentation website had been updated a little bit, but I think it's worth just spending a moment to pull that up. So the newer documentation is react.dev. And it is helpful to look at external resources outside of just careers in code, right? So if we go to the learn section, there are two different approaches to a lot of different documentation websites. One will kind of be more project oriented, that kind of follows how the curriculum of how we teach a little bit more. And so that is normally called learn or guide or something like that. And then there's the reference side of things, which is more of like the mechanics manual, right? That is, these are the nuts and bolts, and this is how everything kind of comes together or works under the hood. So if you are in the learn section of this and pop down to managing state, you can see there is a whole section in here about what state is, reacting to input within state. So if we scroll down a little bit, we'll see an example that we've already worked with, right? Which is, hey, if we have a text area or a form input, that will have a value and an on change. That is tied to the value in state. We need our event that is going to take out the target value and set it into state. Setting it into state is all coming from our use state from up here, right? And so this documentation is good if you kind of want your hand held through each of the steps of state, especially in terms of examples of where all of that comes from, right? That is a different approach to if we go to the reference section will have under hooks, because remember, use state or use effect or anything starting with the word use is what React calls a hook. In other words, it's something built into React that we are hooking into that functionality in our own code. And so if we jump down to the use state here, you will see that they have the very basic outline of all of that. But then if you uh, dive into this a little bit more, they will have a definition here of what state is. A component's memory is what they call it. Basically, I think about it as any data that we display to the end user. But they will go through this. Again, this is over in the learn section of how to use state when a regular variable isn't enough. So in other words, whenever the variable updates, it won't trigger a re-render compared to state, which will. And they give you a whole breakdown here, way more than a single sentence definition would be able to. But again, if you are someone who learns more from the technical side, more from the well, I want to understand everything that I can do under the hood. You definitely want to be more on the reference side of things, where you can get into something like use effect, and they will give you, hey, this is a basic example of a use effect, how you could use it when the component first mounts. If the URL of the server ever changes, this is what I basically want you to do. So couple things in the documentation. You do want to be careful on this documentation because it can be a slippery slope of understanding way more than you need to in order to get it working. You can see how long this use effect page is. It just keeps going and going and going and going, right? And so you want to be careful on the reference side of things because it can get a little bit too in depth, but it can also be helpful in knowing everything that is possible with just those small few things that we have set up. Any questions on documentation or external resources?
What I also like about like documentation too, like it gives you like it shows like an example. Like if you scroll up a little bit, it shows like right there, like it shows you like how to like do something like that. That's also like about this documentation. And same thing with Joe said. I just probably honestly just need a little bit more practice with use effect and use state. So just I just gotta get more familiar with React.
Yep. And there's one other thing that we'll be learning, not maybe not in this project, but in a future React project of how we can pass state around in a prop, and be able to update that across multiple components. So we will be learning about that. We have the entire blog project coming up, but tonight we're going to focus on that weather app. We're going to look at a little bit more API data. We're going to practice setting API data into state. We're going to figure out how we can use map in order to display the forecast. And then we're going to look into some other weather app features like, hey, what if I want to be able to change the location, right? And we'll look into more about geolocating, exploring documentation on the open weather map side, lots of different things headed down the pipeline.
So will it be okay to like reference like code from the documentation?
Absolutely, yeah. The way that I reference the way that I go about using the code may be a little different than the way the React documentation goes about the code, and that's okay, right? So there are lots of different ways that we can access props. Is just an example that comes to my mind, and one of which is to put the props in curly braces in the function in the component, right, and then put the names of the props in there. Some people don't like doing that. Some people like putting the word props without the curly braces, and then whenever they reference their props, they say props dot and then whatever the name of the prop is. That's okay as long as you understand, hey, these are just two different ways of doing it. The documentation does it this way. Max showed us how to do it that way. This is the one I like more, so I'm just going to stick with it. That is totally fine. Give me 1 second because I am realizing I need to re-enable my API key for Open Weather Map, which is a step you guys don't have to do, but I don't want it to hold us up later in class. Documentation, by the way, is something that you should never feel embarrassed about accessing. If you're ever in a technical interview, you can always pull up something, especially if you are used to that documentation. That can be a great resource to use, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. All right, let's dive in to our code from last night. So because we are working with React, we've only done this once before, but because we break our code up into different day structures, we got to do a little bit more work. We are going to go into our day one weather. We are going to look at our node modules folder, single click on that, right click, and go down to move to trash. For whatever reason, it is quicker to duplicate our project without node modules and reinstall it than it is to copy everything over with node modules still in place. The real reason for that is there are thousands of tiny little files in node modules, and it just takes the operating system a long time to duplicate all of those out. Plus, it's a couple hundred meg. So over time, we don't want to eat up our computer storage by having several copies of the same projects just a couple days across. Once we delete our node modules, I'm going to right click and I am going to duplicate. I will rename my day 1 weather to day 2 weather and remove the copy. I'm going to pop that open in VS Code. The live share link is now in the Zoom chat. I am also going to right click and open in integrated terminal. And before I can run npm start here, I do have to fire up, I do have to reinstall all of those node modules. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say npm install. So again, right click over here, open an integrated terminal, go ahead and run npm install, and you will notice npm install will regenerate out the node modules folder for us and install all of the dependencies of our project like React and all of the dependencies of React itself. Once we get that installed, if you forget that npm install script or command, you will get something that says React scripts command not found, right? And we can easily resolve that npm install. That takes care of that error. Once we do that npm install, we can do our npm start. And if everything works right, we should have the weather show up from where we left off.
I accidentally went a little too fast and I hit I and I hit enter, but it's
Oh, you cut out there.
you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I was saying I accidentally hit I and while I was trying to write install, but I accidentally hit enter too quick and it still installed for me.
Yeah, the npm I is just a shortcut. It's an alias for the full npm install command. So they will do the same thing. If you did like npm in, it would be like, oh, that is. But npm I is just a shortcut for install. Any other questions? Anyone not have where we left off yesterday? Anyone need another minute? If you were not in class yesterday, we are working with an API called Open Weather Map. My code is in GitHub if you want to use that as a starting point, but you should go through and get your own API key. Because my API key goes out on the internet as part of the YouTube recording, I disable it every night just to make sure that it doesn't get used nefariously. So the API we are using is called Open Weather Map only because they have a free tier. If you do not have an API key, their API keys do take about, I don't know, 30 minutes to activate. So make sure that you sign up for an account, create an API key using that. And then again, wait about 30 minutes before you start using that API key because they are a little slow on activating it. Okay, so where did we leave off last night? Let's start with a little documentation. Let's number out this code just as a refresher to get back in where we left off, right? So the first thing we do up at the top here is we import our first component outside of app called forecast day. We don't use it yet. All we're doing is saying, hey, by the way, when we say forecast day, this is the file that I want you to go out, pull it in from. We also, number 2, import use state and use effect both hooks from React. And we come down here and we, number 3, set up a new state variable that will hold our forecast data. Now we go into a use effect and we say a number 4, use effect with an empty array as the second parameter tells React to only run this API call when the component first loads. If we leave this out and make the API call instead directly, the API call will run every time the component re-renders. In other words, every time state is updated. What do I mean by that? Well, whenever we do a set forecast data, whenever we update state anywhere, React jumps back into action and goes, hey, app has now changed. There is now new data in here. So I need to go do everything again in this function because the data has changed. Well, there are 2 exceptions to that. Well, 3 exceptions, really. What it won't do is it won't overwrite our state, because the state, to use React's words, is like the component's memory. So every time we re-render a component, every time a component has new data that it needs to display to the user, it won't overwrite state. That's special case 1. Special case 2 is it won't rerun a use effect unless the dependency array has changed. This second parameter right here, that empty array, says there are no dependencies of this use effect. In other words, only run this use effect when the component first mounts, when the component first renders. And 3, the special use case, the third special use case for when a component won't remount or rerun some code is if it's a function, because functions, as always in JavaScript, only run when we call them. So the first time this loads, it comes in, it goes state variable, I got some memory, this is special data, it's going to display to the user, great, we got that set up. Use effect. Okay, use effect is saying, all right, this is going to run in the background the first time that this component shows up. Now it comes down here and goes number 5, check to see if forecast data is in state yet. It's not, so show a loading message. Now we think we're done, but this use effect has been running in the background. So now we come in here and we say number 6, running in the background, we now make the API call. Number 7, after parsing the data, we set it into state. Now this set forecast data is coming from our state up here, and now it's going to do something special. Because we are setting that data in state, it is taking it, sending it into the use state. The set forecast data stores whatever data is coming in right here into our forecast data here. Now, after this number 7, we've updated state, so the entire component goes, whoa, something's changed. We got to go through, see what has changed. It ignores number 3 because, again, first use case, state is always ignored on updates. Number 2, it ignores this use effect because use effect is a special use case, and it goes, all right, I understand you only wanted me to do this when the page first loaded. The page has now loaded. I'm done with doing all of that code. 3, it doesn't have any other functions like an on change or something like that for it to ignore. So now it comes down here and says number 8, this forecast data in state is no longer empty, so skip this return. Instead, it comes down to number 9 and says, show all this HTML instead. Now we think we're done, but we come down here to this forecast day. That is really going to be our number 10, which is render 5 forecast day components that were imported from number 1, I hope. Yep, or number 1 right up here. And pass them a prop called day with the value we want to show. So we take Saturday here, we pass it into a prop called day, and we go into forecast day. Forecast day now takes that prop called day, which is going to be number 11. Tell forecast day component it is getting a prop. Then number 12, make the value of the prop day show up in our HTML. And that is ultimately what makes our days show up at the top. Joe, what's up?
Real quick, just popped into my head. How does scoping work for that variable? Is it just because we've nested it inside the element or the element tags and right there, or can I pull anything from anywhere that we imported the function to?
It is scoped only to that component. So if we put another component inside forecast day, unless we also pass the day prop down through the middle component, we would not have access to it. So prop is scoped into the component that it is passed into.
I mean the other way around. Like if you go back to what is it, app.js? Yes.
Yep.
Like if we define day up somewhere up here and made it global, could you pass it through, like call it in forecast.js, or does it have to be passed through in?
It has to be passed through in a prop. It can, even if we did something global up here, if we said something like that, we wouldn't be able to access animal here.
Gotcha. Okay.
But what we could do is say animal equals animal. And without those quotes, right, it's going to pull from the JS variable. And then we could access animal in here. And then we would get 4 undefineds and our dog.
Gotcha. Okay. Just curious.
Yep. Other questions? Feel like we're getting the flow. Any questions about how the re-renders are happening, why re-renders are important in the first place, any of that kind of stuff? At a certain point that you kind of stop worrying about that and you go, oh, I set it in state, so that is going to automatically just update all of my HTML. But you don't want to forget that that is happening, because otherwise it makes it really easy to accidentally make an API call more times than you intend or something like that. Okay. So let's dive in. I'm going to refresh this. I do have a lingering error that I want to take care of before I forget about it. So it says invalid DOM property class. Did you mean class name? And I'm like, yes, I probably did. but it might take me a little bit to figure out where I use that. So if you look at the stack trace here, they're saying ultimately you used it in app. But in app, you had a div and a div and a div that eventually was a forecast day. And inside forecast day, there's a div and a div that uses class name. So what this is trying to tell us is, hey, it's actually a problem in forecast day that you forgot you used class instead of class name. So if we go over to forecast day, indeed, we have two classes in here that should be class name. So I'm going to go ahead and fix both of them. And then keep in mind that the console in React likes to linger, right? It likes to not clear out errors. So we can go ahead and refresh. A refresh will actually cause it to clear out. And now I know I am good to go. Okay, now that I've got my error cleaned out, I can look at this and I'm like, all right, we did all of this work to get the forecast data back. But as you guys have learned from the New York Times API, the way we get that data back isn't always necessarily the most friendly thing and not something that we want to show every little piece of information, but we do want to use some of that data to display it to the user. So if we look in here, we get our code 200, so it knows it works. We have our city information in here. Okay, that's good to know. But if we pop open this list, we get something interesting going on. We have this thing called DT, and you notice that it's kind of counting up over time. Well, if we pop open into that DT, we also get more information. We have something called DT text, and it says 7:24, which happens to be tomorrow, 0 o'clock. Okay, it's kind of interesting. If we look into the next one, we see the DT text is uh 24, right? 7:24, but then it's 3 o'clock. Well, that's kind of interesting because what we're basically getting is the forecast across every 3 hours. And if we times 3 by the 40 that we get back, we get 13 days, right? Which is almost a 14-day forecast. Is that right? No, it's a 5-day forecast because the times are every 3 hours. I think that that's the way to go. Anyway, the problem that we run into is we don't necessarily want the forecast every 3 hours. All we want to do is spread that forecast out and pick out one date from every day that we get coming forward. So we've got a couple ways of going about that. The other thing that we want to do is make sure we're getting the information out that we want. So we do have the date text here. Based off of the date text, we should be able to figure out what day of the week that is. And then we also have, if we pop open the weather, we see the description of what the weather will be. That's pretty helpful. And then we should also see in the main here, we've got the temperature, and that's what we want to use. So basically what we need to do as this next step is cherry pick out of these 40 objects, just the 5 days that we actually care about. So what we are going to do, give me 1 second. Is we basically need to write an algorithm that is going to go through all of that data and extract out the information that we actually care about. Oh, I was hoping to find how we did this last cohort, but I will just do it manually instead. Okay. So it looks like if we do 0, that puts us in tomorrow's weather. Now we need to figure out what the day after that is, right? If this is Wednesday's weather, what we care about is Thursday's weather. So if I go down here and go 7 down, that still puts me in today. So if I go to 8 down, that gets me into tomorrow, right? So we're just going to pick this, as this is going to be technically the weather at midnight. We would probably want to get into like what's the ultimate high and low and all of that stuff, but this is going to be complicated enough to pick out those days worth of weather. So we're going to just attempt to do the algorithm based off of the weather at midnight, if that makes sense to everyone. So if I start at 0 and then add 8 every time, that is going to get me into the next day's weather. Does that make sense? Because this is at 0, 7:24 midnight. If we look at the 7th index, that is 7:24, 21 o'clock. We add 3 hours onto that additional forecast. That puts us into tomorrow's weather at 0 o'clock. So I need to start by writing a loop that is going to cherry pick out every 8th index in our data coming back. So here's how we're going to do that. Once we get the data here, I'm going to just comment these out for now. And I'm going to say, let extracted data equal an array. We're just making an empty list that we can cherry pick out the day's weather at midnight. Now we're going to write a for loop. And we've seen for let weather of weather data or day of weather data or something like that before. But I don't want to loop through every single item in that loop, right? Because we don't care about the hourly forecast or the 3-hour forecast. All we care about is every 8th item in that array. So we're going to say for let I equal 0. And while I is less than the data dot list dot length. Okay, where am I pulling that from? Data, we know, is this big object in here, right? That's what's coming back from the API. List is a key inside of the data that stores an array. Well, all arrays have a property built into them called .length, which will always return the number of items inside of the list. And once we get into that, how do we want to increment the loop each time it runs? Well, we just said that we jump by 8 every time that we need the next day's data. So what we are going to do is say I plus equals 8. So again, start at 0. Once you start at 0, add 8 to it, go pull the 8th item out. Once 8 is done running that loop, add another 8, we get 16, pull 16 out. Add another 8, keep going. Okay, how do we now use that? We say const days forecast equals our data bracket I. In other words, go to the data, pop into the list. Sorry, I forgot that list there. Then go get out the 0 index. Then go get out the 8th index. Then go get out the 16th index. If this works, we should be able to console log out our day's forecast. I save that. I scroll all the way down to the bottom of my list. I'm going to actually clear this and refresh. And what do we get coming out here? Well, if I open the first one, it's tomorrow at 00. If I open the next one, we get the 25th at 00. And if I open the third one, I get the 26th at 00. So now we've taken our list of 40 items and simplified it down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, our 10-day forecast with the dates that we actually care about. pausing there, double check that you've got those dates coming out in your console. See if you have any questions about that code. Joe, you had a good question in the chat. Is it best practice to write code that calls an API as little as possible, especially in cases where you're paying per request? Yes, absolutely. And a lot of APIs will say, hey, because most people, when they want weather data, want the forecast and they want the current temperature, we're going to make a new API call that has all of that information combined, right? Or they may say, hey, it turns out that you're using us to send a message, but when you send a message, you need to know the contact information of who you're sending the message to. So we're just going to include that information in the API request. So yes, that is a very standard thing to try and minimize API calls as much as possible. And when you get into kind of more advanced full stack web development, you can also get into caching of API calls, of basically saying, hey, someone else is making this API call that we just made 30 minutes ago, and the data is not going to be any different. So because of that, don't make the API call. Instead, just pull it from a cache. Sometimes you can store everything up front and store it for later use. Sometimes you don't want to, right? So the forecast may change, right? So a proper caching mechanism will allow you to set that up and say like, hey, if I ask for the forecast within the past 6 hours, just use the result from before. Otherwise, you remake the API call. Redis is a very popular tool that is used for that, for storing that information in and automatically having a what they call a TTL, a time to live, which will automatically clear it out. We won't get into anything with API caching because that is certainly a more advanced mechanism, but it is a very common thing to do. It also can be against the rules of the API. So you want to be careful because some APIs will actually say, no, we want to be called. We don't want our content to be stored on your server or in your code or in your database. So you do need to be careful about that. Most APIs will say caching is fine. Thank you for not continuing to hit our servers. But you do need to be careful about that.
I have a question about the code, possibly.
Yeah.
I see how, like, in the console, you get the 12 a.m. time. Is it possible, can you use the API to get a specific time of day? Like, maybe when it's like an average temperature?
It is possible, I think, with a different API endpoint, right? So if we go over to the Open Weather Map and look at their API, you will see. So the one call API is what we tried to use last night. And they do actually have this for free, but you need to enter a credit card in case you end up making more than 1,000 calls, which is fine. But if you look down here, you will see they include the current weather, and then they have it broken down minutely, right? Which will be like literally for the weather for the next 60 minutes, which is overkill. Hourly, which is what we're getting now, except it's every 3 hours. And then they do have a daily one where, yes, they are giving you exactly the data that we care about. And so that is an option, but again, they require a credit card to activate this particular API. They also may have, so they do have a daily forecast, and I think what we used instead, we said forecast. Let's see what's in this one. Call 16-day daily weather forecast. This is what we are using. And we did. Oh, you know what? We didn't pass daily. Let's see what happens if we do that. So I'm going to comment out this for loop. I am still going to console log my data. And this time I'm going to access daily instead, right? Because the only part that's different about that is the daily right here. I will go refresh. And now I get another invalid API key. Please see a FAQ for more information. And I believe what they are going to say is the same thing. The separate subscription plan, one call API. Their API is not the best at telling you what you got to pay for and what you don't. Because in theory, data 2.5 forecast daily. Data 2.5 forecast daily. Yeah, I'm going to guess that this API key is because, again, they want us to enter a credit card to like activate the API information. But yes, that is totally an option, right? There may always be a better API call that sets our that gives our the data that we're looking for. But there are also times where they're like, well, all of that data is already included, so you got to do the work yourself, right? So they may say, hey, in the one that you're using, loop over all of them and average out the temperature on all of them, and that's how you could get the average temperature. Or they may say, so many customers have asked us for that average temperature that we just made a whole new endpoint, throw daily at the end of it, and you would be good to go. So yes, the answer is sometimes you get lucky and other times you have to do the work and do it yourself. So I am going to take that daily out, only because I think it does require the credit card in order to access that particular endpoint. Very good question, though. So yeah, we're going to just cheat and use the temperature at midnight, but we could definitely get fancy down the road or set this up to use actual credit card and go from there. Any other questions? Okay. All right, so now we have access to the 5 timepieces that we actually care about, right? So we need to start extracting some of that information out. So what we are going to do is we are going to say extracted data, and we are going to push something in. Why did we use an array for extracted data? Because we need to keep track of 5 days worth of information, right? Why did we use dot push? Because we want to add more information into the end of that array. Now, what data do we want to push in? We want to push in the temperature, the name of the day, and the conditions for that day, right? Well, all 3 of those are all related to the one chunk of information, which is the weather for that day. So because of that, I'm going to push in an object. And again, what are the 3 pieces of information I said I wanted to push in? The first one was the temperature. Where does the temp come from? It comes from our day's forecast dot main dot temp. So I'm going to say days forecast dot main dot temp. And again, this is just like New York Times. We got to peel away the layers to get down to the information that we care about. Then we also need to extract out the day of the week. Well, 2024, 7/25, we could look in the calendar and say, well, that's Wednesday, but we want to display to the user that that day is actually Wednesday. So what we can do is a little work up here. We can say const date is equal to a new date. Date is a function that is built right into JavaScript. And we are going to pass it the day's forecast.dt text. DT text is coming right here from our date and time. Now we need to convert that out. So what we are going to do is say const day name is equal to our date that we just set up here, and we want to convert it to a locale time string using the US language, English US. And what do we want out from it? We want the weekday. And to test that all of that is working, we are going to console log day name. And if we refresh, we see Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So we are good to go there. So now we get to use that information. So we take our day name and we store that along with our temp. Now you may notice I didn't say day name : day name. That is shorthand in JavaScript. So if we don't specify a key after the value, it will assume that day name is a variable with a key of day name and the value of whatever was in that variable when you made the object. So this is the exact same thing as saying day name : day name. And the last piece of information that we care about was what the precipitation was. So it looks like that is in weather, index 0, and the main description. So we are going to store the precip from days forecast dot weather dot index 0 dot mean. I'm going to comment out my console log here. I'm going to throw a console log extracted data at the end of my for loop to make sure all of my data looks right. I will take a break after this, let you guys catch up. If everything works, when I refresh, I should have an array which has all of my data, the temp, the day name, and the precipitation I am looking for. And again, make sure you're checking in your console. Make sure that you've got 5 days worth of information in the array. Make sure that you've got the temperature, the day name, and the precipitation showing up. If you do have it working, take a step back, right? Make this not just about following me, saying, why did we do all of that? Do I understand how we started from all of this data in a list of 40 different items, and we eventually extracted out just the pieces of information that I cared about? I got the temperature. How did I get the temperature? That was in an object called main. How did I go from 40 down to just the couple days that I cared about? That's the for loop that said skip 8 every time that you go through this. How did I access the day's forecast? Oh, I used the index that that for loop was going through. What else did I have to run into? Oh, they gave me the date, but the date was in not in a day format. It didn't say Thursday. It said 2024 7/25. Okay, how do I convert that in? I make that text a date object, and then I can use a function built into JavaScript to convert that into a day name that I actually need. Why did I use extracted data as an array? Because I need to keep track of several days worth of data. Why did we use an object? Because we had a couple things all related to the same piece of information that we are going through. Joe.
I'm getting a invalid date as the response to day name.
Make sure, check your T. Is it DT_TXT?
Now it is. Yeah, we're good.
So the date forecast is that storing like the data that we got from the for loop? Okay.
Yeah, so if you look here, data is the big JSON block that came back, right? That big block that came back had a list in it of 40 different 3-hour forecasts, right? And I'm like, all right, well, I don't want 40. I want to just get the one for the day. So we do our for loop. Our for loop is going over the list that was in the data that's coming from our API call. And we just happen to be jumping by 8 every time the for loop runs. So we take I, which starts out as 0, goes into the list from the data that's still coming from the request, and grabs out the 0 index from the list and makes that the day forecast. Then the for loop will run again. The next time it runs, I will be 8. 8 means 8 3 hours times 3-hour forecast times 8 gives us 24. So that means we're into the next day. So now I is going to be 8. 8 is Thursday's data instead of Wednesday's data. So we use that. And the easiest way to think about that is when we look at if we log out all of our data instead and take a look at the list, we realize that 0 is 24, 8 is the 25th, and 16 is the 26th. So all we're doing is skipping by 8 because, again, all of this data is the 3-hour forecast data, and what we really want is is just 1 for the entire day. And yes, this is a little hacky because we should be using the forecast for the entire day, not the forecast at a particular timestamp. But for the sake of understanding how to work with data and work with the for loop and all of that stuff, this is how I would go about it. Any questions anyone not have this as their output? Okay. So,
Hey,
oh yeah,
sorry. I tried this one last thing to debug, but it didn't work.
it's
Can I
fine.
share my screen?
Go for it.
Okay.
All right, the first thing I notice is you've got a red squiggly on 38, which
I
probably
know.
means we are missing a closing something.
I was
Usually a
thinking that, but
curly,
I
but
couldn't
we never
find
know.
it. I know it belongs to the use effect, but
Give me remote. So our for loop starts here, and it should end here. And then our make API call finishes here.
Oh, oh,
And then that is the
Yeah.
one for the use effect.
okay.
And then those two are just warnings. So go ahead and check your browser, see if that fixed it. And you're going to want to pop open.
Oh,
Yeah.
my console. Sorry.
Yep.
Yes, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, and then the only other thing we want to check is instead of logging data here, which is all of the information coming back, instead let's
Mhm.
log the extracted data. And that will show us the 3 pieces of information that we extracted.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay, so one question you may ask is, all right, for loops, I got it. We've covered that. That's the first time we've done like an old school one of controlling the index, right? And I understand fetch and all of that stuff. But how in God's name am I supposed to know to convert it to a date and that to locale date string is a thing, right? And my answer to you for every other cohort up until this point would have been, I don't know, Google it. You're going to get an answer on Stack Overflow. God only knows if it's the answer you're looking for, or you've got to dive through all of the documentation and MDN, and you're going to get a really long list of all of the different functions that are built in. That's going to just confuse you even more. All different kinds of things, right? So as I am stalling, because I don't remember how to do this off the top of my head, I went over to ChatGPT. And what did I ask it? I said, convert a day name with the text string, and I just copied and pasted it in using JavaScript. Anyone else will tell you when you're learning code, don't use ChatGPT. You can use it as long as you understand the answer that it's trying to give you. So it says let date string. Okay, well, I don't actually have a variable called date string. Where is my date string coming from? It happened to be coming from my days forecast DT Okay, now it says make the date. That's exactly what we did right here, except we happen to do it with again, the date text from the variable coming in. Then it says let options weekday long. And I'm like, okay, but this is just an object, right? So we can kind of simplify this. And instead of putting options here, we'll just put weekday long in as the second parameter. Okay, I understand ENUS. It probably stands for English US. And then date, that's coming from the date we created up here, to locale date string. Oh, that must be a function that is built into date. And finally, it will console log out the day name. Okay, well, we don't need to console log it out. We'll console log out the extracted data once we are done processing all of that. Why do I log out my extracted data here? Because I don't want every individual object to log out. I want it to be done running the for loop, then log out the final results. So, reminder to you, yes, there is always documentation. Yes, there are always external resources like Medium blog posts, Stack Overflow, YouTube, but be very selective of what you are asking ChatGPT, and you will usually get an answer for something like this, which immediately solved the problem that I was trying to get down into. Now, if I took this exact same thing just to prove a point and put it into Google, Google shits the bed. It's like, I don't know how to do that. Now, if we give Google less context and say, convert a day name from a text string in JavaScript, again, haven't actually tried this before, don't know if this is going to be the right thing. I can come down and it does give us a pretty similar answer. So we could have gotten there, but what happens if this Stack Overflow answer has the date string in a different format? Well, ChatGPT is intelligent enough to actually know, hey, because it's in this format, this is the particular code you should use. When we asked Google that and actually gave it the example of the date, it's like, don't know. So we have to broaden our search results. In this case, we happened to get lucky and did get to the final same answer. But this is a really good example of using ChatGPT to your advantage, get that code snippet that you need, but then also be able to understand how that snippet is working. Okay, any questions before we continue on with our code?
Why we didn't use to local time string?
To local, what was the name of the function?
Time string.
Yeah, so to local time string is going to give us the actual time, right? So it's going to say, if I run this, to local time is going to give me 7:15 p.m. I don't really care about the time of the weather forecast. What I was trying to get out was the day's name. Because if we look at the final result that we're trying to get to, this is what I'm trying to fill out, right? Where the top part is the day, and then we'll get the icon working, and then the temperature we want to get showing up, right? However, if I wanted to do an hourly forecast, right? If I wanted to show every 3 hours worth of weather data, I totally would have used to time string, and that would have gotten the job done.
Yeah, the reason why I said that because I'm probably like thinking like too far, but with like manly is and like right there and then below it's at like Wednesday like 7 p.m. So that's why I like thought like, oh well, maybe we should probably use time.
Yep. We can actually let's do that now. What we could do is and feel free to follow along with me here. The kind of the beauty of React is we can do things in line, right? We can switch over to JavaScript mode instantaneously. So what we could do here is put curly braces in here instead and say new date to locale date string en us weekday. And I think we can say short. And that gives me Tuesday. That's good, because it actually is Tuesday. And then I can do a space, and I could say, again, make a new date. This time, go to a to locale time string. And this one, I think I can just say ENUS, and it will drop in the exact time for me right there. So really great question and a good example of in React, we can switch over to JavaScript, access the piece of information we need, and drop it right in. Other questions or questions about the time that we just dropped in here? Okay, so now for the fun part. We get to pool all of this together. All the way up at the top, we extracted the data. Now, that data, we need to put in the memory of the component. We need to say, hey, this is live data that displays to the user. Because of that, we need to set it into state. So we're going to take our extracted data, and instead of setting in all of the data about the API call that we were making, instead, we are going to set in the extracted data. Well, you know, it's kind of convenient. Our extracted data has 5 days worth of data in it. So instead, again, set extracted forecast data to our extracted data. Now, instead of having to put 5 days worth of forecast components, what if we just loop over the 5 days worth of data and pass that data into the component? That is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to use a special function in JavaScript and heavily used in React called map. So we are going to say forecast data dot map to get the forecast day. We are then going to return a forecast day component with the forecast day. You know what? Hold on. I'm going to rename this to be better. For days data, let's do this. Days data. Days data. Days data. Map is just a special type of loop. Days data is giving us access to each item that we are looping over. We still want our forecast day to show up, but we are now passing it a new prop that is coming from the loop of days data, and it is passing that in a prop called days data. If you notice, we now have an error message that I don't think we should be having. Forecast data, set forecast data. There's not forecast data. I broke it. Forecast data. Never mind. I just had to refresh it. I did not break it. Okay, so we've got forecast day. Our forecast day is over here, but we got to give it a little bit of a facelift because we're no longer passing in just the day. We are passing in all the days data. Well, if we remember, our days data has 3 pieces of information in it. It's got the day name, the temp, and the percip. Well, we can use that. Instead of calling it day, we're going to say days data dot day name. And just like that, we've got Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday showing up. Okay, kind of cool. It's all 28 degrees, little chilly for me, even for Syracuse. Let's get our temp showing up. I can come in here and say, hey, go to the day's data and grab the temp. Kind of cool. I can even get fancy and throw this in a math.round, and that will take care of the decimals for me. Icons, we got to do in a second, but I want to pause, give you guys a chance to catch up. Again, follow that flow of the data from our use state into our algorithm. It's extracting out the data we care about. It is pushing it all into a variable that we eventually set into state. State updates, gets it in forecast data. We go down to our render or return. We loop over that forecast data to get access to each day's worth of data. For each day, we want a forecast day to come out. That forecast day is now told you are going to get the day's data as a prop. And then because they are in curly braces down here, it knows how to extract the data out from that object and make the temperatures show up here. Anyone need another minute? Anyone have a question? Before we get into icons and go on break. Okay. For our precipitation, it is either rain or clear apparently right now. I guess that is typical of standard Syracuse weather. I'm sure there are other precipitation values that could be in here. Fun fact, there is actually one called tornado, and we use the open weather map API at my job. And we build conversational bots, right? And one of the things we have to do is like we say like, oh, it looks like it's a rainy day out there. Don't forget your umbrella. Or wow, it's nice and clear. There's not a cloud in the sky. Don't forget to sunscreen up. And then we got to the end of it and we went, oh, we probably need to say something like, if there's a tornado outside, please stop talking to us and seek shelter. So there are other values here, but for the sake of seeing how these if statements work, we're going to just handle rain and clear, and then we will handle any other kind of weather with just a question mark, which probably sums up Syracuse weather better than any other thing that we could put in there. So we are going to come in here, and I want to basically convert this, right? I want to say, well, if the weather says that it is raining, show the rain emoji. If it shows that it is clear, then show the sun. And if it's something else, show a question mark emoji. Well, we could try and do that in line with ternary operators, but that gets really messy. And it also sounds like something that we already know how to do in JavaScript, right? We already know how to write if statements based off of some conditions. So we can take advantage of that and in JSX combine those two concepts together. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say let forecast icon equal an empty string. And if the day's data dot precip equals clear, forecast icon equals, I'm going to do my empty string again, but because emojis are really just another text character, I can hit Command Space to pop open my emoji picker and go grab the sun. Else if days data dot precip equals rain, forecast icon is going to equal rain. Else, forecast icon is going to equal, you could do a question mark here. I'm going to do a rainbow because who doesn't want a rainbow to be in the forecast at some point? Go ahead and save that. Now we've separated out the logic. Our if statement is up and then the JavaScript half of things goes great. That's before the return. Everything's good there. We come down here. All we need to do is delete out our snow emoji icon, put our curly braces in so we switch to JavaScript mode, and finally put in our forecast icon. And just like that, we have our weather showing up over the next 5 days, properly showing the day name, properly showing the icon, and showing the temperature. Any questions on any of that? Anyone not have their weather forecast showing up? Okay, let's go ahead and do attendance before I forget. The secret word tonight is rainbow. Once you do attendance, go ahead, go on break, be back at 7:15. Going on break a little early tonight, so we will be back a little earlier as well. When we get back, we are going to do a text input. We are going to learn about the joys of geocoding, and we are going to make our weather location or our weather app work for locations other than some location that we just happened to pick. We will do that, and then we will open it up to any challenges to see how we would further extend the weather app for any time that is remaining. But go on break, be back at 7:15, and we will go from there.
Wait, what's the attendance again?
Rainbow. Everyone had a nice break. All right, so where did we leave off? We left off with our API call is happening. That API call is doing some work to extract out the data that we care about using the for loop. We are doing some additional formatting, like getting the day name based off of the DT-TXT that the API provided for us. We take that data once we've extracted it, once we get it in the format that we want it, and we store it in this array, an array of objects called extracted data. Once we are done working with that extracted data, we set it into state. Setting it into state wakes up forecast data in the state up here. The state there then comes down to bypass the loading and goes down to this for loop. Well, it's not a for loop, it's a map, it's a type of loop. This map is going over all 5 objects that we created in that API call once we set it into state. We take the day's data out of there and pass it in as a prop to our component forecast day. Our forecast day then takes that information based off of the precip that gets set, figures out what emoji to use, and stores that in a string called forecast icon. And finally, we use that forecast icon along with the day's data, day name, and temperature, along with math.round to display our 5 days worth of data. Do we have any questions about that? Anything that marinated over the break that we want to review?
Is it normal that my console says each child in a list should have a unique key prop?
You know, I was waiting for mine to say that, and I didn't notice it. I had to scroll up. So that is a very good question. Obviously, our code is still working, right? And that is very important to note is whenever we see a warning in React, it means, hey, you're probably not doing the absolute best thing with your code, but it also probably isn't going to break. Emphasis on the probably. Sometimes you do get a warning that breaks everything, but here's what's going on here. Each child, what does it mean by each child in a list? Well, this forecast.map is actually generating out a list of components, a list or an array, really, of components. And React has a hard time keeping track of that whenever we generate it out in a list. And so what React likes us to do whenever we use .map or whenever we have a list of components is to put a unique key on each one of those components. That way, if a section of that data updates, React can keep track of which component updated instead of having to update all 5 forecast days. It could say, oh, the weather only changed on Sunday's forecast, only make that data update instead of having to re-render all 5 days worth of data. That doesn't really sound like a big deal, and it isn't in this application, but when you have a list of thousands and thousands of items, saving React from having to re-render all of them can be really helpful. So it is, like I said, it doesn't break your code, but it is React best practice to put a key on every item. So we do have to identify what do we want to use as a key. Well, We can't use temperature because there could be two exact same temperatures across 2 days. We can't use precipitation because it's not unique. It's going to rain the next 2 days. You may be tempted to use the array index, but using array index as a key, if you absolutely need to, if there's no other unique data that we can use the index. But the reason why we don't want to do that is what happens if we, for whatever reason, are like, we don't want to tell you the weather on Friday. So we take Friday out of the list. Well, now everything shifts up, right? Saturday becomes index 2, Sunday becomes index 3. That key is now shifted. And so React goes, come on, man, I was relying on that key to know what data to update. So index, again, you can use it if you have to. Normally, we would use the ID that is coming from the database, but we don't really have an ID coming from the database because it's not our API, right? So the best thing that we can use here is day name, because hypothetically, if our algorithm is running correctly and only pulling out the days that we care about, the day name will always be unique. So that's the best key to use in this scenario. So all we need to do is throw a key, which looks like another prop. But again, we only need to do this key if we are generating out a list of components like we are here for forecast day. And we can say days data dot day name. And key is just one of those special props that React knows to look for. You will notice that error is still in your console, again, because the console does not clear every time we update our code like it did in previous sections. So if we refresh, you should see that error or warning now goes away in your console. And that's all from adding the key on here. Sorry, long answer to a short question, but you do want to make sure that you are being careful with the keys you select. They need to be unique, and ideally they don't change when the array that's holding all of the data updates. So Joe, interesting comment there. And I had a student reach out to me and go and ask, is it still normal to be feeling imposter syndrome 14 weeks in? The answer to that is, unfortunately, it is common to still feel imposter syndrome 11 years in, which is where I am at this point. I felt it when I started my job as a junior dev. I feel it every time I start a project and think, oh my God, I'm starting from scratch again. What am I doing? And the good news is it doesn't completely go away, but it does exponentially get smaller and smaller, right? And so oftentimes you get to your capstone graduation, you're demoing it, and you're like, I can't believe all I got done on my capstone was this part of the database or these couple screens, or I can't believe I just made a little to-do app. Could you ever imagine making something like Facebook? And the answer to that, surprisingly, is, well, actually, I kind of could, right? Because I did a little bit of project management. I figured out all the different features I needed to get done. Maybe I didn't get them all done for my capstone, but turns out making a post and making a comment on a post are kind of the same thing. They're using the same concepts. It's just an API call. It's just a user interface. It's just some CSS. It's just some information in the database that we're saving. It's just some information that we're pulling back, right? Same goes for React. You're kind of at that point in React now where you're like, yeah, this all makes sense, and I can kind of see how it's better than vanilla JavaScript, or maybe you're not there yet, but maybe you're building your way up to that. Turns out React just a better way of doing what we've already learned at this point, right? You don't get to the end of a 6-month boot camp and go, I've learned everything, I'm a full stack developer now. But you also don't get to the end of a 6-month boot camp and go, oh, well, that was kind of a waste. I don't know why I bothered learning all of that kind of stuff when this is the next thing I should be learning, right? That's not the goal here. So I do think that imposter syndrome is something very easy to feel. And what you described isn't exactly imposter syndrome, right? You just feel like sometimes you're just learning more things without being able to say, but this is what I can build now because I learned those things, right? Not exactly the same thing, but I think there's a little bit of overlap there. So what I would say, my advice there is anchor yourself in what you have done and the assignments that you have completed, right? And I really hammer this home a ton. Um, we give you guys assignments not because we need to give you grades. Believe it or not, the funding that we get to pay for all of your tuitions does not require us to grade you guys. But we also went off the deep end in cohort 1 and we were like, no grades, let's all be hippies and learn together. Not anything derogatory towards hippies, but we took this approach of like, it doesn't matter, we just want you to learn, so just learn the stuff. And then it turns out that we didn't know how well you were doing and didn't get a gauge of, well, do you need more help? Are you really getting this content? Where are we at? So then we went to the other end of the spectrum and went off the deep end and we were like, assignments every week. And you got to do this and you got to fill out the feedback form and you got to do all this stuff. And then it turned out we were giving you so many assignments that even the top students were like, I'm not learning anything from these assignments. They aren't benefiting me. And so we finally did net out at this point, right? Where it's not quite an assignment every week, or if it is an assignment more frequently, we try and make them smaller assignments. Why do we do that? It's because we have refined the assignments that say, hey, if you can do this assignment, you can prove that you are learning. Maybe that assignment is only every 3 weeks, but your grade is really should be a good anchoring for you because that is saying, hey, we are testing you through those assignments. You're able to complete those assignments. And because of that, you're probably doing all right. Now, the flip side of that is, yeah, but what if I'm not? What if my grade's a 50% right now? I'm really freaking out. Well, it's probably a 50% right now because you had a giant midterm project and you have 2 back-to-back React assignments, right? The other one's coming up on Thursday. It's like a 15-minute quiz. You'll definitely get it done. If not 15, 30 minutes, it's a really quick assignment. If you are looking at your grade and you're like, it's a 50, I really don't feel like I am making progress on all of this. That's when it's time to reach out to Jason. That's when it's time to reach out to me. That's when it's time to say, all right, where am I struggling the most? Because 9 times out of 10, where you're struggling isn't actually the assignment. It's the overwhelming anxiety of feeling behind, right? And all you need is someone to sit down with you at that point and say, where are we most worried? And you go, I have to do this and this and this and this. And it's not that you don't know what you need to do, it's that you don't know where to start, right? And that's where we really try and help you and go, all right, narrow in on this one assignment. Forget about all the other assignments, this one assignment. And if you can narrow in on that and get that one assignment done, you just have overwhelming anxiety and you need to focus on one thing. Sometimes you focus in on that one thing and that isn't enough. And you're like, I'm still stuck here. I can't get this one thing to work. That's where we lean into one-on-ones. That's where we go, all right, let's figure out where you're stuck. Let's figure out the right resource for you. Let's get momentum and get one assignment done. Because if we get that one assignment done, then all of a sudden it feels like the logjam breaks and you can really build from that. For you in particular, it's about college classes. I often forget to reflect on what you've done up to this point. Yeah, absolutely. And the portfolio is a great thing to go back to. We will in class go back to it and practice full stack concepts with it. But your portfolio is a really great thing to go back and go, all right, I've completed this weather app, and this weather app is actually kind of cool, right? It's showing live weather data. We've accomplished a lot through that. Let me put that on my portfolio. And when you put it on your portfolio, it isn't just a little image that says weather app and you're done with it. No, you should put some content behind that. You may not be the best writer, but you guys all know how to communicate, right? So put a little description there. Say, all right, I built this weather app. It's showcasing the first time I'm using a use effect and use state hooks in React. I also integrated an API, read through the documentation, and got practice using API keys and parameters in the URL. huh, it's a lot more than nothing, right? We accomplished a lot. And we're only, what, 125 lines of code in this? Yeah, but think about that paragraph that I just said. You just practiced a lot of different concepts. It's almost as if we specially craft these projects in a certain order to build your experience up and get practice with those things, right? So a little of that is faith in us, faith in your education, faith in the curriculum. The flip side of that is also taking a moment to reflect, because in class, it's always on to the next project. It's always we're adding this next feature. It's always, all right, this is working, right? But you do notice we do take a step back and we number out all the code and we go, this isn't just about getting it working. It's about extracting out, making sure we understand it. But then it's on you guys to go, all right, Friday, I don't have class tonight, or Saturday morning, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to open up all the days worth of code, and I'm going to go, oh, we've never used use effect starting on Monday, but by Thursday, not only can I write a use effect, but I can actually tell you why we need the use effect and what it's doing. That's progress. And it sounds so minuscule. It sounds like you're looking at the trees and not at the forest. But that's when those retrospectives at the end of the week can be really helpful to go, hey, I actually want to grab my notebook. I want to go to a whiteboard. I want to actually list out 5 things or 10 things that I learned this week. Because that forces your brain to go, no, I now have 5 things I got to fill out. This is a test of myself. I'm going to go back, I'm going to review. And then when I look at that list, I can now give myself credit for that. I know this is a rampage, I know, but I think it is a valuable one, right at that halfway point to talk about. I had something I told you guys at the beginning of class yesterday. We were supposed to have 60,000 rows in the database, and we had 2.7 million rows in the database. And it was like everything had ground to a complete halt. I was up until 11 o'clock last night waiting for all the duplicates to delete. I had to rewrite the algorithm because it was literally running out of memory. Not a fun day yesterday. Today, got to patch that up, and I was explaining it, explaining it to you guys, explaining it to my parents, and my mom was like, "Oh, I'd love to see the solution for that." And I'm like, "No, you wouldn't. You you won't understand that code, right?" Like when we talk to other non-developers, they don't understand the difference between JavaScript and HTML. They just want it to work, right? But that doesn't make it any less valuable. That doesn't make it any less time or struggle that you invested into getting it to work or getting that fix out there, right? So I do think it is really important to use your fellow students as a support network, right? Of, hey, I had this light bulb moment, or hey, I'm still struggling with this concept, or hey, I'm afraid to ask Max what state is because he said it 9 gazillion times and I still don't understand it. That's totally fine, right? But also give yourself some credit. Pull out your little rubber duck that hopefully you've gotten from one of the in-person events we've had up to this point, and go talk to your rubber duck, name your rubber duck, and be like, these are the 5 things that I learned this week, or this is the one thing that I'm still struggling with, but look at what I built. Actually give yourself credit for that, because I think that helps with those feelings of not just imposter syndrome, but feel like you're not making progress. And then, of course, project management weighs into that a little bit as well. If you're doing proper project management and you have your done list, you're crossing things off. It isn't always about what's next, what's next, what's next. It's also about, yeah, but look at what I got done this week. That was actually pretty good. Terry, I don't have a preference there. Terry asked, would you prefer us to review the stuff we learned right after class, or should I practice the concepts during the weekend? That really depends for everyone, right? I was always surprised. I'm shot at by 8:30. I'm tired. I've worked 2 jobs. I've reached the point where I'm like, and I've had a couple students be like, can you do a one-on-one right after class? And I'm like, if there is absolutely no other time that you can do a one-on-one, I will find a way to make a one-on-one work after class. But for any of you guys who have performed on the stage, you know how tired you are after a show. You know what it takes, how much energy you put out compared to every day-to-day living, right? I feel like teaching is being on a stage. I don't talk to anyone else with this level of enthusiasm. I don't, my energy level feels like I am performing, even though I'm sitting in front of a web camera, even though I'm writing code that I write all the time and know how to write inside and out. I feel like I am on a stage. I feel like my energy level, my energy output is really high. And because of that, I am white. So I personally wouldn't go on YouTube that night and rewatch the whole video, right? I might go, you know what I am going to do? I'm going to go get a glass of wine. I'm going to go unwind. I'm going to go play a game for a half hour. I'm going to go. But before I go to bed, I am going to reread through the code. I'm going to either try and comment out and number out my code. I'm going to try and write my own comments. Or, you know what, maybe I'm just going to read through it. I'm going to grab, and you guys know, I always have a notebook right next to me. I'm going to grab my notebook, and all I'm going to do is either write down questions or write down light bulb moments. I'm going to go through this when something clicked, when I got a definition, when I understood why we needed to use that map, or I understood why to finally use a for loop, or I understood how components are working in React and how props change it. Whatever it is, maybe I write down the light bulb moments. Then I go to bed, right? You need some kind of intermediary step, because once you get to the weekend and go, all right, now I have 3 hours to sit down and focus on this instead of an hour after class where my brain is zapped, maybe that's your approach. I also, all throughout college, was a biphasic sleeper. I slept 4 hours. I was up for 4 hours. Those were my most productive 4 hours of the day. I slept another 4 hours, and then I went about my day. I have zero, I will not shame anyone on their sleeping schedules. Some people are night owls, and that's okay, right? I have shifted. I'm in an 11 to 7 sleep schedule. If I am up past midnight or up before 7 a.m., you really don't want to be around me. It is just not pretty. And last night, let me tell you, I was up until 11:30 fixing a freaking algorithm that I was not happy about. But your schedule is different, right? So I can't tell you, I can't answer that question for you. Some people have absolute clarity at night. I used to be that way. And the other beauty of that is no one was online. No one was sending me messages. No one was discovering new bugs. No one, I could just focus. And at the end of that session, I had 15 different questions for 10 different people. I would schedule them to all send at 9 a.m. And I would go to bed knowing that I had not only completed all of my tasks, but I had everything queued up so that when I did wake up, I had answers to all of the questions I was waiting for. Obviously, that's in a team environment, right? A little bit different than a boot camp learning environment. But everyone has a different schedule that works for them. A lot of people fight their schedule, right? And sometimes you have to, right? Sometimes you're like, listen, I have work at this time. I got to go in. There's nothing I can do about that, right? But if you feel that you are fighting your schedule, I would encourage you to explore that a little bit. Find out if you are a night person and just didn't realize it. Find out, wake up at 6 a.m. instead of 8 a.m. for an entire week in a row. The first day or two is always going to be rough. You're always going to be cranky when you get up at 6 a.m. if you're used to getting up at 8, 9 a.m. But try it, right? They did a study of all the FANG company CEOs, so Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. Obviously, their company names have changed a little bit now, but anyway, they used to be known as FAANG. They found that all of those CEOs got up at like 5 a.m. every morning, and the first thing they did was work out. And they were all in bed by like 8 or 9 o'clock. And you think, oh, what losers? And you think about everything that they've run, everything they accomplish in a day, the fact that, you know, we have iPhones and Macs in front of us are because of them, right? So there is something to be said about getting up earlier. But like I said, when I was in college, I was building 2 or 3 apps. I was juggling my full-time college workload, and I was working 30 to 40 hours a week at the Sage doing lights and sound and all of that kind of stuff. So I do think a regular sleeping schedule is a really beneficial thing. I don't think that it needs to be a sleeping schedule that the rest of the world necessarily approves of or works on or is typical. But I am a big proponent, even if it is a crazy sleeping schedule, to get on a regular sleeping schedule. So yeah, I can't really answer the question. Maybe shoot for a middle ground, shoot for I'm only going to spend 30 minutes after class. I'm going to give myself a break. I'm going to spend 15 minutes, maybe even just jotting down notes of what I learned tonight. And then maybe I spend more time on the weekend and review those notes and figure out where my questions are. Or you go, I'm a night person. You know what? I don't have to go into work until 12, or I'm setting my own schedule at this point. Maybe I am a night person and I just want to blitz. I want to rewatch class. I want to come up with all the questions then. And then I need the weekend. I need to take off. I need a day of rest. Coding every single day is not a healthy thing to do. I don't code every single day. I take Saturday and Sunday off. If I do, I'm doing one-on-ones, and that's kind of a different thing. But I do not recommend coding every single day for several weeks in a row, let alone 6 months in a row. So it all just depends. Yeah, I am not a D&D person, but Lord knows when I have to focus in at work, it might as well be a 4-hour session of me coming up with my own content and focusing in on all of that stuff. But know a lot of D&D people, so not bashing them. Yeah, doesn't matter what time you get up, as long as you're getting a healthy amount of sleep. Everyone says 8 hours of sleep is what is healthy. And then it turns out you dig into medical studies on that, and there's absolutely nothing behind what 8 hours being the standard is. As you get older, the number of hours of sleep that you need decreases. So figure out how many hours of sleep you need. Experiment with that. If you're getting 6, try for 7. See if you feel better at 7. If you don't feel any better at 7, or you find yourself waking up early anyway, or not being able to fall asleep, maybe 6 hours of sleep is fine for you, right? I'm a big proponent of napping. There is a science behind napping. There's something called the NASA nap, where you sleep for 26 minutes and then wake up after that. That prevents you from going into phase 2 of your sleep schedule, your sleep phases, where you start to feel groggy when you wake up. So if you ever taken like an hour nap and woken up and you're like, oh, I just feel groggy, my brain's not totally with it. 26 minutes is the limit where you get the most benefits of sleep, or you have to jump to an hour and a half to 2 hours, at which point you get a full REM cycle. So there's some science of sleep behind that, both for naps and for how long you sleep at night. Experiment with it, but then figure out what works for you and lock into it. And really commit to, I gotta be in bed by this time and I gotta wake up at this time. Think about your middle school and high school days and how productive you were by being in a schedule. It's kind of, as an adult, reverse hacking that to be something that works for you guys. And then finally, my final rampage before we get back into a little bit of code. I am not a big proponent of blocking out time. Again, this is like, are you a night owl person, or are you a morning person? Whatever works for you is good. I have roughly 3 to 4 meetings a day that are all between 15 minutes and an hour. And we try to shoot for 30-minute meeting blocks instead of an hour-long meeting block. If it is a brainstorm meeting, if we're all contributing, if it is something that we need to have several meetings to discuss, our meetings are fine. Otherwise, every meeting we schedule is for 30 minutes, because everyone should have a chance to talk. Everyone should get action items coming out of the meeting, and then everyone should have a chance to complete those action items before we meet about them again. Or ideally, we don't have to meet about them again. We just do them and say that they're done. Why do we need to meet and tell everyone that they're done, right? That's why you have tools like Slack and MS Teams and all of that stuff, right? So meeting culture, I think, is a major problem in our society, in our culture. I think it is slowly killing our productivity. I absolutely hate meetings, right? Obviously, a classroom is not the same thing. You're learning 3 hours. It makes sense. It's how long it takes to get all these concepts, right? But yes, meeting to discuss the meeting, or meeting to discuss when we can meet about it, or meeting to discuss who should be in the meeting. There's a book called the 25-minute meeting. I'm a big proponent of that. It's a really quick read or a really quick audiobook. They've done all kinds of studies about how to run a successful meeting, how to do a agenda properly, how to figure out who should be in the meeting. You read the book, and at the end of it, you're like, this is a dumb book. It's all common sense. And then you look at your meetings and how inefficiently they're being run. And then you go, oh, maybe this isn't all common sense. Maybe this does make a lot of sense. It is not a 25-minute read, but it is a pretty quick couple hour book if you're doing it on audiobook. Anyway, highly recommend that. If you are someone who has ADHD or problems focusing in, blocking out your time can be really helpful. There's something called the Pomodoro timer as well, which also runs on a 25-minute system, interestingly enough. But that is, you do several different sessions, study sessions in a row. You take a 5-minute break between each one of them. And then after you do 4 or 5, maybe 6 sessions in a row, you take an hour-long break, and that can really help you focus as well. So I'm not a big proponent of blocking out time. My calendar is my go-to, my Bible, I gotta adhere to that. You guys will notice I'm never more than a minute or two late to a meeting. If I need to reschedule, I try and reschedule as soon as possible so it doesn't impact your day. But calendar first and foremost. You committed time to someone, you got to show up. Hopefully you can rearrange those meetings to be in a block to be a little bit more efficient. If that's possible, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're meeting with people who they are booked, solid. But outside of that, it's all about prioritization for me. And at the beginning of every day, I do a stand-up. What did you do? What did you accomplish yesterday? Which fights imposter syndrome, which is making me reflect for a minute, making me not only aware of what I got done, but also sharing with my team, hey, I accomplished this. This is the progress that I made. That's one question. What are you doing today? Forces you to prioritize. You can do it as a bulleted list, a numbered list, or as a sentence, as a paragraph, but forcing me to think, once I get whatever done what I think I'm going to get done today, what's the next thing that I'm working on? And then the final third question is what roadblocks do you have, right? Because that's really helpful for my boss. That's helpful for the rest of the team to be able to say, I'm blocked by this person, or I'm waiting to hear back from this company, or my next roadblock is going to be, I don't know what to work on next. And being able to share that with a team not only helps individually figure out where you're at a daily level, but also helps you share with the team, make sure that roadblocks are being discussed, all of that kind of stuff. So big fan of doing a daily stand-up, even if it's just journaling that out of, I'm going to answer 3 questions to myself every day. What did I do yesterday? What am I doing today? What are my roadblocks? Or if you're in a team environment, that can be a great thing to suggest of, hey, I'm working with 5 different people. They all have 5 different roles. What if we use a bot to do that in Slack? And every day she posts at 9 a.m. At 9:30, she posts a reminder. And then at 10 a.m., she posts the report of everyone who answered the questions. And then we go shame anyone who hasn't answered the questions, unless, of course, they said they were a day off or vacation or anything like that. So those are my productivity tips. I may recover some of those in the how to adult, but hopefully that gives you guys a better idea of scheduling and managing tasks. And at the end of the day, when things are thrown at me, I don't know if you're going to be able to read my handwriting. This camera, use my notebook as scrap, right? So at the top there, it looks to be random numbers. That was keeping track of how many deleted items I had in the database to make sure they were consistent. And then underneath them, I just have notes, right? Of like, where are the potential problems that are causing this? Maybe it's a problem in the database. Maybe it's a problem with, setting something out. Just grabbing a notebook and writing down tasks, whether it's someone asked me to do something and I was in the middle of something else, whether it's I had 15 things thrown at me and I need to prioritize them. So I write them all down as they get thrown at me. And then as I'm ready to move on to the next task, I just number them out. These are the priorities. Those are the systems that have worked for me. And they sound really basic, but they've gotten me to where I am in my professional career and managing a team of 5 developers and making sure a company stays on it, a software company stays on its tracks. And that goes for careers and code stuff too, right? Jesse threw something at me this morning and he said, hey, the AEI, the source of the grant funding, basically the county, needs a quarterly narrative. And instead of dropping everything and clicking on the link and filling it out right away, I wrote it on my notebook because my notebook had 3 other things that were more pressing that were roadblocking people. And then I got to the AI narrative and I went, all right, now I'm at a spot in my day. I can focus in on this and knock it out in 10 minutes. But if I dropped everything and did that immediately, it would have taken me much longer to remember what I was working on before I got that request. Okay, sorry that was a rant, but I think it was a worthwhile rant. Really good questions. Anything related to that we want to wrap up before we dive back into our code?
What was the name of the thing again? I forgot the one that I think it was like you mentioned like a guide to people who having like hard time focusing.
So I will post there is a couple things. One is called the Pomodoro technique. And I just pasted a link in the chat to that. I don't personally do that, but I know a lot of people have had a lot of success with it. So that's one. The other is the 20-20-20 rule, which is basically just preventing eye strain. Every 20 minutes, you're supposed to look 20 feet away for 20 seconds. That's not like a project management thing, but it's a good mental health and physical health for especially for your eyes. And then the other one, I will post a link to the bot we use. This is specific to like a team working environment. So you have to have Slack or Teams or Google Chat set up to use that. And I think it is like $2 a month. There are a bunch of different $1 a user a month. There are a ton of different there are a ton of different bots that do that same thing, but you can achieve stand up doing the same thing every day. Buy a notebook that you like, find a pen that you like. Yes, I'm a little bit of a nut job and love finding different pens and fountain pens and all of that stuff. No shame in spending $1 or $2 on a pen that you really love. But journal out and focus the journal on what you do yesterday, what are you doing today? Do you have any roadblocks? That can be a really great way of doing project management. Yeah, the fountain pen was a learning curve for me. And it's really interesting. The fountain pen, I love how flowing it is, but also gives you scratchy feedback, which sounds really weird because you don't really want a pen to be scratchy. But then the other end of the spectrum, there is the Uniball 207 RT Impact in blue. And it's a very specific pen. And when I order them on Amazon, they often send me the wrong one, but it is the most smooth flowing pen that like all of a sudden you look down and the entire page is blue because it just puts out so much gel ink. It is the smoothest pen. I absolutely love it. It's a clicky one. Joe, get that shit out of here. I do not want to see anything like that as triggering for me. But yeah, I always have pens nearby because I'm a very picky writer, and my handwriting is absolutely terrible. So don't get me wrong on that, but there is something to be said about writing things down and crossing them off and feeling accomplished. Any other questions? Spike class is great, right? Like I love these impromptu Q&A sessions. I'm sure some of you may hate it, but these are all good insights into living life as a developer. Any other questions? Okay, let's dive back in to our code. For a split second, I thought I forgot to resume recording after the break, and I was like, damn it, I know someone's going to want to go back and review that section. It was recorded. We're good. Okay, so we started out with our weather over here, right? And I think that that's a really good place to start, but this is only the weather for Manlius, right? Well, actually, it's for Syracuse. That isn't even correct. So what I want to do is open this app up. I want to make it so you can type in a location and we get the results for that location. Sounds pretty easy. So I'm going to start with an input. I'm going to go up to my I'll do it out. I'll do it inside the can't make up my mind. I'll do it outside the container. So I'm going to do an input type text, and that can be a self-closing tag. I will do a label that says enter location. Whenever we do a label, it is good accessibility to add an HTML for. In regular HTML, it will be just a for, but in React, we call it HTML for. And we say label for location input. And then we add an ID of location input here. Save that, take a look. I don't know, that looks pretty ugly. Let's style that up maybe a little bit. We'll do another div class name container. We will throw this down here. I'll throw a class name on that of form control, which comes from Bootstrap. Looks a little bit better. Can live with that. I'm going to throw the whole thing. I'm going to change my div class name container to a form. And I'm going to throw a button called get weather that has a class name of BTN and BTN primary. Not the prettiest, but you know what? For now, it gets the job done. I'm going to leave that there. Everything that we just worked on is in this one form tag. One more minute. I know that's quick HTML, but gets us an interface quick and dirty. Anyone need another minute? Everyone good? Should look like this. Okay. I'm going to add a button type here of submit. And I am going to now come up to the form and say on submit of the form, get weather. Now it's going to be mad at me because it doesn't know what get weather is. So I'm going to come up here and add a new function called get weather, which is going to be async. It's going to get the event that happens, the form submission, and it's going to event prevent default. So it doesn't refresh the page when we submit it. Now, there are two ways of accessing input data in React. We could actually do it the JavaScript way. And 9 times out of 10, that's the easier way of doing it, but it gives you less control. And in fact, that's why it is called a controlled input or an uncontrolled input. So we can actually get the value of what is typed in here by just using the event. So I can, don't follow me on this, I'm just going to give an example, say console.log event.target. That's going to give me the form itself. Then go get the elements inside of that form. Then go find the location input, and then give me the value inside of it. Location input is the ID on the input, so that's what I'm using right here. In theory, I can type in a location and hit get weather, and out in my console comes manliness. This is what we call an uncontrolled input. Why is it uncontrolled? Because React itself isn't controlling it. Why would I want to control it? Well, what happens when, say, hypothetically, if I hit the get weather button, I want manliness to clear out. I want the form input to be empty again. Well, I can't do that in an uncontrolled input, right? I shouldn't be using the document object model in React. I should be doing it the more Reacty way. The more Reacty way of doing this is making it a controlled input. So that's what we're going to do. Instead of accessing it through the event target, I'm instead going to wire it up to state. So I'm going to come all the way up to the top of my code, and I'm going to group my two states together, and I'm going to say location input and set location input. And that's going to start out as an empty string. Form inputs don't like to be null. They like to be empty strings to start out as instead. So again, the variable that is going to contain the data in state, the function that we use to update that variable in state, and the default or starting value of that variable. No need to re-import it because we already have one import. Once we import it once, we can use it as many times as we need it. So I put my use state up here. Then I got to hitch my input to this, and I have to do it in two places. I come down to the form input, and I'm going to say the value of this input is location input. And on change, the second place I do it, when we type a letter into this input, grab the event and set the location input to the event target value. Now, with just the value and the on change, we have changed our input from an uncontrolled input, meaning the browser was the one controlling it, to a controlled input, meaning React is the one controlling it. Oftentimes, a very frequent mistake you'll see in React code is someone puts the value on it, but forgets the on change, or their on change is incorrect. What that will do is it will make the input look like it is read only. It will make it look like you can't type letters into the input because you're basically telling React to control it, but you're not telling React how to update what it is controlling. So value and on change. Now, because we are setting in the location input, I don't need to go through this long chain in my console log. I can console log out the form input value, and I can also do something like set form input, set, sorry, it's not called form input, location input. And I can do set location input to something like so now we can type things in. I can hit get weather. It will still show me the ABC that I typed in, but because React is in control, it is able to set the new value of that input to whatever we want. So on submit get weather, we wire up our value and our on change. And then in our get weather, we're able to access the location input and set whatever we want in that React. And because React is controlling it, it is able to update any of those values. Everyone good? Okay. So now we got to go on and let's plan this out a little bit, right? Because sign of bad engineering is when an engineer just goes step by step and doesn't have the big picture. So big picture, we have to set up a form. We have to link the form to React state so that we can get the value that's getting typed in. Check, check. We did those. Now let's think through what's it going to take to get this weather data to show up. So I'm going to go up and I'm going to look at my API call up here. We're going to just deal with the forecast data. We're not going to deal with the current weather data, although that would be a really good challenge for yourselves for this weekend. If you want to take that on, try and figure out if you can get that to work. But let's look at getting our forecast data for whatever input they enter. It is taking a couple URL parameters. It is taking units imperial, and we're like, all right, we don't need to change that. It's taking my API key. All right, it needs that to make sure that I'm not making more calls than I'm allowed to. But then look at what it's doing here. It's taking a latitude and longitude. Where did we get that from? We just Googled Syracuse latitude, longitude, and it came up, right? And we hard-coded that in. But obviously, that's not going to work, right, for other locations. And I don't know about you, but I don't happen to know the latitude and longitude of most of the cities that I would be looking for data in. So we need to head over to the Open Weather API, Open Weather Map API again. So I'm going to head to their API. I'm going to look in the, what did we use? The 5-day, 3-hour forecast. So I'm going to look in their API document. And again, this is what we were working with. But look at what they have under lat and long. They say if you need the geocoder to automatically convert city names and zip codes to geo coordinates and the other way around, please use our geocoding API. Okay, well, that sounds promising. Let's take a look at the geocoding API. So it says pass in this Q. Q normally stands for query, just like I usually stands for index or iterator. Q usually means query in an API URL. And it says pass in the city name, state code, and country code, limit it, and also pass in your API key. So that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to copy that URL. I'm going to go down to my get weather. I'm going to take this out for now. And I'm going to say, all right, we are going to get a res back that is going to await a fetch. And I am going to say, hey, let's just assume all the locations we're looking for are in the US. If you want to leave that out, you can. I think it will still work. Now I'm going to replace my city name and my state code with a template literal. That template literal is going to come from whatever location input I put in. I am also going to set the limit to 1. Could we deal with showing multiple locations and letting them pick whichever one they wanted? Yes, that would be the next step after this. But for now, we're just going to assume whatever they entered is going to be a direct match. Let's just get one of them back. And finally, we are going to grab the API key from our first call, because that API key will work for both of them. So again, Q is our location input in the US, limit it down to one result, and set in our API key from the first call. If we do all of that, we are going to get our data by awaiting our res.json, and then we are going to console log out our data. Feel free to copy and paste from the live share as well. I will put the link to the live share back in the chat in case you disconnected at break. If all of this is working, we should be able to switch over, enter a location, city and state, hit get weather, and down in your console, you should be able to pop open, and it found apparently Manlius, New York. It found the town of Manlius, which is fine. And inside, it has the latitude and longitude that I am looking for. Does anyone not see this in their console or need another minute? Again, that will only be in your console after you enter a location and hit enter or click the get weather button.
So it seems, you know, from your search results and my search results, that it's able to search even portions of a word. Like if the input matches some form of what the is in the API, it'll just pull. I don't know what the best, like I put Clay in there for Clay, New York, and it went through Alabama. I'm assuming it's assuming just the nearest state if there is not one inputted in there versus.
Yeah, it might be alphabetical. And that's why whenever you enter addresses in a decent website, it will either enforce that you put address 1, address 2, city, state, zip in as separate fields, or it will give you an autocomplete, right? And that's definitely the better UX. Whenever I'm filling out an address and I type in like the first couple letters of my street name is kind of unique. And so because of that, it automatically drops in Manlius, New York and the zip code, right? So Google actually has a really great autocomplete API that will do all of that work for you. And then as soon as the user clicks on an address, it will give you like the verified address that USPS has, the latitude, the longitude, all of that kind of stuff. So if you are doing anything with addresses in your capstones, I can personally highly recommend the Google, I don't know if they call it I think it's the Google Maps autocomplete API in SDK, but this is, just include the state for now. And it should get you close enough for making this work. All right. So now we got to make all of this work. So I am going to, in that data, the two things I care about are the latitude and longitude, but they're nested in this array that has the object in it. So I'm going to extract those out. I'm going to say const lat and long are going to come from my data 0, LATLON, yes. So this would be the same of saying const lat equals data bracket 0 dot lat and const long equals data bracket 0 dot long. But this is called object destructuring. It basically means it is a quicker way to destructure, to extract out the values of an object using this syntax. So just a quicker way of getting it. Okay, now that I've got my latitude and longitude, I would like to update my weather data, my forecast data. And I'm like, oh, wait a second. If I come up here, I have my make API call, which is already using the latitude and longitude. It's already doing all of this work to do the JSON, extract out the data, and to set all of the forecast data. But I have a slight problem. This make API call is scoped inside of my use effect. So if I come down here and I tell it, hey, go make the API call, it is going to tell me make API call is not defined. Why is that? Because my use effect scope, the curly braces of the use effect, are containing the entire make API call. So I can't access make API call unless I have it scoped outside of the use effect. If I move it outside of the use effect, it can be used inside the use effect, but it can also be used inside my get location data. So I'm going to take my make API call. I'm taking the curly brace on the same line as the make API call all the way down to line 45 in my code, the closing curly brace of the make API call. I am not touching the use effect itself. I'm just taking the make API call inside the use effect. I'm going to cut it and I am going to paste it right beneath my use states. Now, if I do that, my search won't be working yet, but my page should not be broken. If my page is broken, stop, debug, and ask for help now. Moving blocks of code are never easy, and so we want to make sure all we did was we took the make API call function inside my use effect, and we moved it outside the use effect. This entire process is called refactoring. We are refactoring our code to make it more efficient. Could we have copied this code and pasted it right down into our search result? Yes, and it would have worked. But we've got a big chunk of our code that we now want to reuse. So we are refactoring our code so that we can reuse it. Okay, everyone good? Took the entire make API call inside the use effect, and we moved it outside the use effect. So now the use effect is just this dinky little use effect here. Take that up and move it with it. Okay. Now that we've got our use effect on it, I don't want to lose anyone here. I know we're at the end of class, but we are like 2 lines of code away from making all of this work. So I am going to now modify my make API call, because just like we can use props in React to change the content of that is inside the prop, we can also use parameters in functions to change how that function will run. So I am going to take the latitude and longitude. I'm going to say, hey, instead of using 43.0481, instead drop in the lat. But if I don't specify a latitude, I'm going to use something called a default parameter. I'm going to say if make API call is called and latitude is not specified, default it to 43. But if the make API call is called and they do give us a latitude, forget about the 43, use whatever they gave us instead. It's called a default parameter in JavaScript. We're going to repeat that with the longitude. We're going to say, hey, drop in the longitude. But if they don't give us a longitude, assume that it's -76. One more line of code. We are done for the night. And I will debug with you guys. Give you guys 10 minutes to debug. Once we get this in, we have, again, make API call. We've made a function that we can access anywhere in the component now. We have passed in two parameters, latitude and longitude, and said if they don't give us the latitude and longitude, default it to these values. Then we modified our API call to say use the latitude and longitude that are getting passed in from these params. Excuse me. Once we do that, we make our API call in the use effect. We don't give it a latitude or longitude, so it uses the defaults. But now in the get weather, because we have the latitude and longitude, all we need to do is make our API call and give it the lat and the long. Believe it or not, this should be the end of our weather project. Or I'm going to get really mad because I missed a step and it's not going to work for me either. So drum roll, please. We come over here. I have to believe that it's really hot in, I don't know, Los Angeles, California. I'm going to hit get weather. And just like that, apparently there's rainbows in Los Angeles tomorrow, but Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are going to be sunny and warm. Lots more that you can do with this weather project. And if you want to push on with this, either this weekend or at the end of the cohort, you could make this location update based off of what was typed in. You could make the current condition show here. You can make the current temperature show here. You could handle whatever we're getting a rainbow for instead of the actual weather icon. You could update the temperature and current condition up here. Lots and lots that can go into a weather app. And why we do the weather app is there's a ton of data that is available that we can integrate in. We could even integrate in the Google autocomplete here or make it so that the search results show up and you pick whichever result you want. So that shows up there. It doesn't update here because we haven't tied into the state, right? So if you look in our code, we basically hard coded manliest New York right here. So what you would have to do is save the data into state and then make that state data show up. I could do that, but I feel like you guys are probably at a tipping point and I want to give you guys time to debug. So if you are fully getting all of this, if you are making it all, if it all makes sense to you, push yourself. Try and make manliest New York disappear and make the location name show up there instead. If you need help debugging or want to use the next 3 minutes to just read through the code and see if you have questions, do that now. We will start tomorrow's class by numbering out all of this code, finishing out where we left it off at as our final review, and then we will move on to our next project. So spend the next couple minutes reading through the code, seeing if you have any questions. If you want to push yourself, try and make the location name not say manliest and actually show the location that you want it to. There's a cop-out way of doing that and a much better way of doing that as well. So 2 different approaches you can take. Review all the code, see if you have any questions. If you don't and you want to get out of here, have a great night. I will stick around for at least the next couple minutes to see if any questions pop up, and I will see you all tomorrow.
Could you help me out?
Sure can.
So like I'm getting forecast data.map is not a function.
Okay, share screen.
Okay.
There it is. Okay. Take me to your code. And I'm going to request remote. Okay, so usually the problem isn't with the dot map here. It's what we're setting into the forecast data that it can't map over. And so if we go up to where we set that in, That's going to be set forecast data. We extract the data. And then what we set into the forecast data shouldn't be all of the data. It should only be the data that we extracted.
Okay.
And just like that, your problem is solved.
All right. Thank you.
Of course. The make API call function, are there libraries or best practices for handling and formatting API data that might simplify the process? No. So there are libraries for making API calls. That's so weird. Apple Music just popped up. There are libraries for making API calls. One very popular one is called Axios, Axios. And Axios was really popular when Fetch wasn't natively supported in browsers. So believe it or not, Fetch is relatively new. And before Fetch, you had to use something called XML HTTP request if you wanted to make an API call in native vanilla JavaScript, and it sucked. It was really, really bad. And so for a while, everyone used Axios or a API function built into jQuery. But when browsers got better, when JavaScript got better, when Fetch got better and was used everywhere, people, including myself, were like, oh, I'll just use Fetch natively instead of having to use some third-party library. The reason why the handling and the formatting of the API data isn't easier is because every API is going to return different data, right? So New York Times is obviously returning data in a very different format than the weather location geoencoding, which is returning very different data than the weather the weather forecast data, right? And so there isn't like a standard there, unfortunately. The good news is you do get better at peeling back the layers of the data, right? Once you get used to arrays and objects and nested data, it does become a lot easier. But no, because all of the data that you care about and the data that someone else may care about and the data that's coming back from the API are all kind of three very separate things. There is no standard on it. But the good news is API documentation is hopefully good enough to help you understand how they're sending back the data, and then you can go from there. All right, let's call one last thing. How can I add validation to the user input field for location? The easiest way you can do it is by using a tag that's built into input. So you can add a really easy, oh, sorry, I have to share my screen in order for you to be able to see it. you can add a very easy tag in here called required. That's the easiest way to do it. The next layer of difficulty is you could come in your not API call in your get weather and do something like if location input does not let's do it like this. If location input includes if it doesn't include New York, say alert NY weather only, else go do the rest of the stuff. Or you know what, I'm just gonna do it as a return. So that would be one way of doing it. If I hit get weather, it says please fill out this form field because we put required on it. And then if we say something like San Francisco, spelled that wrong, and hit get weather, it says New York weather only. And then if I say something like Syracuse, New York, it will actually go in and get the weather out for that. So that's how you would do, that's very basic form input at 2 different levels in React. Any other questions for the evening? All right. Have a great night, everyone. I will see you all tomorrow.